Hi, it's Senator Malcolm Roberts with the weekly wrap-up. And I'm in Brisbane now after a couple of weeks down and swimming in the Treacle in Parliament House in Canberra. There were three main issues that I want to talk about, and then if there's time, I might start talking through some notes that I'm starting to put together on a speech on the Voice. I've already done one speech in Parliament on the Voice, but I'll have another one in Wagga Wagga and also in regional Queensland over the next few weeks. So speaking of the Voice, the polls aren't looking too good, are they, for the Voice, which is wonderful news. But that doesn't mean we can relax. We must keep our foot on the accelerator and really do this thing in, because it is hideous what it'll do to Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders, what it'll do to all Australians, and what it'll do to our country, Australia. The Yes side is now relying upon those of us who are going to vote no not turning up, because it looks like we're winning. And the polls certainly say that, but we can't afford to be confident, to be overconfident. Thank you very much, Not Today, for your comment. The referendum's only 4 weeks away, and make sure between now and then, every day you tell one member of your family or friends or workmates to vote no. Every day, just tell one person. That's, 28 people you can get, almost 30 people you can get between now and the referendum. So we can kill this thing as long as we stop it now, because then Albanese said he will legislate it, and then we'll see what he's really up to. So that'll force him to legislate, or once he sees just how many people are going against his Albanese voice, then he'll kill it. So we can kill it by overwhelmingly smashing it. By the way, Senator Hanson moved a motion last week. She's moved several motions. One was on defining the term Aboriginal. Just a few of us supported her. The Liberals, Labor, Nationals, Greens didn't support her, apart from a couple of Liberals and one or two Nationals, I think. The rest of the Nationals, Liberals didn't support her. Anybody can tick a box and become Aboriginal. And that's highly disrespectful to our Aboriginals, because if you're not Aboriginal, you shouldn't be claiming Aboriginality. So Senator Hanson also moved this week in Parliament to investigate the native title, actually to review native title and a Senate inquiry. If there's a problem, why not find out about it? And again, Liberal, Labor, Nationals and Greens voted against it, voted against simply inquiring into native title. Now, this is why Pauline wants to have an investigation into native title. It's been 31 years since it came in. Time for a review. That's the first thing. But secondly, 50% of the landmass of Australia is now subject to a native title claim. And there are some pretty significant cities as part of that. So we need to have a review of the native title, because the Native Title Act in Australia, the preamble to the Native Title Act is littered with two words, United Nations, littered with it. A lot of people in the cities think, oh, good, we've given the Aboriginals their land, they can get on with it now. Rubbish. The number one problem, I've been across all the Cape York communities, several of the Torres Strait Islanders communities, Aboriginal communities in other territories, Northern Territory. The number one problem everywhere is the Aboriginals cannot get land. They cannot be treated the same way as the rest of us in this country, buying land for their house, getting a loan for their house, using the land as collateral, getting a loan for a small business, because they just can't have anything as collateral. And so we didn't give the land to the Aboriginals. The land was taken off other Australians and handed to land councils. And the land councils control it, and they control the resources on that. It's really turned into another effort of control. And the Aboriginals in the communities do not have control, do not have title, and they don't have the same opportunities we have, because the land councils, the part of the Aboriginal industry, the white and black activists, lawyers, bureaucrats, academics, consultants, politicians, bureaucrats, they're the ones who are controlling what's going on, not the Aboriginals on the ground in the communities. And that's what this Voice is all about. And I'll talk more about that if time permits. Oh, and by the way, one of my staffers said to me, if you didn't, and I didn't catch Senator Nampa Price's speech to the National Press Club yesterday, Thursday, watch it on YouTube. She's fabulous, apparently. And I know in the Senate, she is really good. She and Pauline really line up, two women side by side. They sit side by side in the Senate, actually, and they call out the lack of accountability. And you've got to ask the question. There are 11 members of Parliament who identify as Aboriginal, who claim Aboriginality or part Aboriginality. 11. That means that that's about 5% of the members of Parliament. That's more than, a higher proportion than the proportion of Aboriginals in Australia, which is at about 3.8%. So they're overrepresented, if you say, if you want to look in terms of proportion. But they're not overrepresented, of course, because I believe each senator and each member of Parliament should be representing everyone in their electorate, not just people from their race. So what happens, though, is that only 2 of those politicians, 2 of the 11, will call out what's actually going on in Aboriginal communities. That's Senator Nampa Price from the Northern Territory and Senator Karen Little, another female from, this time from South Australia with the Liberal Party again. And they're the 2, she's part Aboriginal, they're the 2 people of Aboriginal descent that will call out what's going on. They tell the truth. They tell the truth, and that's extremely important. So have a listen to or a watch of Senator Nampa Price's speech to the National Press Club yesterday. She doesn't miss. She hits it square on the head, the nail. I've just finished 2 weeks in Canberra for parliamentary sitting weeks. It is like swimming in treacle in that place. It's just so hard to get things done. The bureaucrats and the politicians lock horns. You know, it's crazy. It is absolutely crazy. I can't get over it. The Liberals dumped $500 billion of debt on our country. The place is in a mess. Inflation is high. Labor comes in, and the Liberals are blaming the Labor Party. Of course, the Labor Party is partially to blame, but it's not entirely to blame. The Labor Party is partially to blame because the state premiers were largely Labor Party during the Morrison years, and they contributed to the high debt through their policies on COVID, the deceitful policies on COVID. And so a big topic that I talked about again and again was immigration. Because every time we check immigration numbers, they're going up. They're going up. We've got 460,000 net immigrants have arrived in Australia in just the last 12 months. 460,000 net. That means after you take away the people who've come in and the people who've left, take away the people who've left, net immigration is 460,000 in just 12 months. Almost 500,000 people. We only have 25 million people in the country, 26 million people in the country. That's a hell of an increase for our infrastructure, for our roads, for our schools, for our hospitals. That is just the people who are going to stay here permanently. It's in addition to the 540,000 student visas in the country. That's 1 million people. That's 1 million people looking for a bed, 1 million people looking for a roof over their head. And that doesn't count the 200,000 or so people on temporary work visas and so on. So that's about 1.2 million people looking for beds. You know, the Albanese government has encouraged 1 million people into Australia when we're in the middle of a housing and rental crisis. You know, I went up to Gladstone recently and Bundaberg and other regional towns in central Queensland, western Queensland, eastern Queensland. People are sleeping under bridges. People are sleeping in caravans, in tents, in showgrounds, in city parks, sleeping in their cars. And yet we're bringing in another 1.2 million people. So that's his solution to the housing crisis. Bring in demand for another 1.2 million people. And then he says in his housing policy that he's going to build 30,000 homes a year. And apparently when the figures are done, they're going to be built at $80,000 each. What he's doing to the homeless, what he's doing to the people who can't afford, that was another thing. I saw some figures. One of my staff, bright young fellow, he got the figures for housing as a proportion of people's income. It's broken into quintiles. In other words, the bottom 20%, the lowest 20% of incomes, the ones for between 20 and 40% of incomes, the lowest 20%, the next lowest 20%, the next lowest 20%, the next lowest 20%, and then the highest 20%. People in the lowest quintile of income, are paying 65% of their income on housing. How do you survive? How the hell do you survive? Because they're in the lowest quintile, so it's the 35% that they have left to spend on food, travel, their future. That's tiny. It's tiny. That's what's going on, and the Labor Party is doing it. So that's proof that life... Oh, there's another note I had here. We're in a per capita recession. What that means is that per person, our gross domestic product is going backwards. It's decreasing. That's a recession. Now, technically, it's not a recession because that requires the whole economy to go into negative growth for 2 years. For 2 quarters, which is 6 months. What they do is they flood the joint with immigrants because the immigrants buy things, and that inflates our gross domestic product, so we stay out of negative growth because we're adding half a million net immigrants on a permanent basis, 1 million immigrants on a current basis, and that increases the spending, which increases our gross domestic product. But if you look at it per person, we are in a per capita recession. They're hiding the technical recession with numbers to inflate the figures for consumption and gross domestic product. And that means because we're in a per capita recession, that's proof that life is getting far worse on average for all Australians. And that's not news to anyone. Just go out in the street and have a talk to just about anyone you meet. People finding it much, much more difficult to make ends meet. So we've got to cut our immigration to zero net, I should say, because otherwise people get confused. We've got to cut our immigration to zero net. What that means is if 70,000 people leave, we only allow in 70,000 to make that up. Not 1 million. We allow just 70,000. Whatever it is that leave, that's what we bring in. Only allow as many people into the country as that amount allows. That will allow us to build the houses, to build the roads, the schools, the hospitals. We've got to catch up. We've been lagging in infrastructure for many, many years now, under both the Liberal Nationals and the Labor Party. And then speaking of costs, look at the power bills. They're going up for everyone. The climate liars, the climate fraudsters, the climate alarmists keep telling us that wind and solar are the cheapest forms of energy. That's absolute rubbish. We have never had more wind and solar than we have now, never had more batteries connected to the grid. What are power prices doing? They should be coming down if you believe the lies from the climate fraudsters, from the politicians, the Liberal, Labor, Nationals, Greens parties. They're all saying wind and solar are cheap and they'll lower the price of electricity. As the proportion of wind and solar increase, the cost of electricity increases. What does that tell you? And that's not just for 6 months. That's for years in this country. And that's for many years, even decades, in some European countries and other countries around the world. As wind and solar proportion increases, the cost of electricity increases because wind and solar are inherently much, much more expensive. And they're simply expensive because they have very low energy density. They produce very, very little energy for the capital invested. And the capital invested is very high, much higher than coal. So they've got very low productivity and very high capital costs. And then we're subsidizing these things. We're subsidizing these toothpicks in destroying our bushland, destroying the human environment, the human habitat, and the natural habitat. So we're destroying the environment. We're killing the environment, supposedly to protect it. It's a complete lie. And what's happening is money is being transferred from you and I, who use power, to the globalist billionaires, to the elitist billionaires. So wind and solar increase in proportion, cost of electricity goes up. And their goal is deindustrialization. Their goal has been stated as deindustrialization. And we see now that the Germans are starting to really consider. There was a finance minister, I think, in Germany. I can't remember if that was the exact title, but I think it was a finance minister telling the European Union they need to stop their policies on deindustrialization. Germany is now they're knocking over wind turbines to extend open-cut coal mines so that they can actually get cheap power. The Chinese are building coal-fired power stations hand over fist, and they're using that power to build wind turbines and solar panels, which they export to us, which drive up our cost of electricity, which shuts down our manufacturing, which we export our manufacturing to China, and then we're more dependent on China. We are dependent on China for our wind turbines and solar panels. This is absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. Sterilizing vast tracts of wonderful agricultural land, food production land, rainforests, native habitat, destroying bird sanctuaries like up at what's the name, Woodlea wetlands up near Ravenshoe. Absolutely destroying the birds, destroying the native habitat, destroying the wildlife corridors with solar panels, wind turbines, transmission lines, and in South Australia, add to that batteries. So it's absolutely insane. So let me just check the time here, because if we've got time, yeah, we've got any questions? I'll happily take questions for a break, and then maybe get back onto part of the Albanese Voice. Fritz says, can you explain why One Nation is working with the Liberal Party? I'm sure there are good politicians out there fighting for our interests. We're not working. We'll work, Fritz, with everyone. I laughed because we're not close to the Liberal Party. Pauline Hanson resigned from the Liberal Party when they didn't have the guts back in 1996 to stand up for what was the truth, and she resigned from the Liberal Party. She doesn't have much respect for them. I don't have much respect for them. Now we will work with everyone in the Parliament. We've worked closely with the Greens, of all people. The Greens' policies, let me make it very clear, as if you haven't heard me in the past, they're inhuman. Most of their policies are inhuman. They're anti-environment. They're anti-human. But the Greens come up with some good things to do with the banks sometimes, and also money, and so we work with them on that, and we have worked closely with them. We work with two of the Greens. I must give them a compliment. Actually, here you go. I'm going to pay the two Greens a compliment. David Shoebridge and Peter Whish-Wilson have been very strong on freeing Julian Assange, and I've joined them in that. And so we're working with them on that. We're also working with them on medicinal cannabis. Now they want to bring in cannabis, including recreational cannabis, marijuana. We don't want that, because that'll scare people at the moment. People aren't ready for that. We don't want that at the moment. We just want to focus on medicinal cannabis, get that in, and once people see how wonderful it is, then consider the other issue about recreation. But we only want medicinal cannabis for now, and we want to get that in to treat people. It's wonderful stuff. So we do work with the Greens. So we work with the Liberals, we work with the Labor Party, we work with the Nationals, we work with the Greens. We work with anyone that puts Australia first. Just pot the balls. Oh, I'm glad to see you voting no, mate. You're saying the two-party preferred system needs to go. Actually, preferential voting is extremely important. It's the only thing that enables the minor parties to have a go and to start growing. That's the only thing that does it. Without that, it'd be first past the post, just like Britain, and it'd just be the large parties. Just like America, large parties. So that's what the globalists want. They want you thinking that you've got a choice between Labor and Liberal, when there's no choice really. They're both globalists. So we've got to keep preferential systems, and the term two-party preferred just refers to whichever the two parties are. Once nearly all preferences have been distributed, that just says the two top parties. One Nation's actually been part of the two-party preferred in some elections, especially at state level, and so that helps us then to actually get Liberal voters' preferences or Labor Party voters' preferences onto us to actually get into Parliament. So we've got parliamentarians now, members of parliament with One Nation in South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, and also 2 of us in the federal parliament, in the Senate. So 5 of the 7 state federal parliaments, we have now got One Nation MPs. And that's been enabled by preferential voting. So, and preferential voting is fair because if your number one doesn't get up, then you can make preferences against the one you don't want. Viv, it's a no, and I'm sick to death of it. Just want it over. Hang in there, Viv. We get it. It was a balls up from the start. It should never have been brought in as a referendum. There's been no facts to it, and I might talk more about the voice in a minute. So I know everyone's sick to death of it. Just hang in there. Thank you for sharing your comment and your feelings there. We just want it over. 4 weeks. Hang on, and we'll defeat this thing. Lot 4656 says, can you trust the postal votes? Well, that's the system at the moment. We don't like postal votes coming from parties. Postal votes coming from parties. We think postal votes should be available to people who honestly can't vote. That these days, it's mainly the sick and those who can't make it physically into the polling booth, or people overseas. But with 2 weeks pre-poll, most Australians living in the country right now should be able to vote. You know, postal votes coming. We have a problem with postal votes. We don't trust them. That said, that they can be managed, but they shouldn't come from parties. They should come from the Australian Electoral Commission direct. So, so the answer to your question is, yeah, we're not so sure about trusting postal votes. Try and vote in person. Games and Stuff Studio. I will be on the street before Christmas at this rate. We need help in small business. Yeah, we've heard that a lot, mate. That's really difficult to just read that because it's all so unnecessary. It is just completely avoidable. Both the Liberal Nationals and the Labor Party have done this to this country. Small business was smashed in the COVID restrictions, absolutely smashed. Apparently you couldn't catch COVID from Bunnings, but you could catch it from a corner hardware store. You couldn't catch it from Coles, but you could catch it from the local corner grocery store. I mean, this was just so unfair. They decimated small business and put the sword to a lot of small businesses. And I think it was deliberate in their selective use of restrictions. We are working to help you, mate. There are so many things. We're trying to cut down the price of power because that is just all artificially high. We're trying to cut down immigration so that the demand for housing decreases and we get a much lower rate of increase. And by the way, the Greens talk about bringing in rental caps and also rental prices capped. And what that does is it drives landlords thinking, geez, I'll be on a 12-month freeze, so I better go in and now and raise rentals. The Greens are actually driving the opposite of what they intend. But all the Greens do is virtue signal, apart from a couple of things. They're largely virtue signalers. So we're working on the main things to help you, games and stuff. And we're also working on freeing up small business. The industrial relations legislation that's coming through will really hurt small business. We're going through that now. You know, we have got I've made a show of it in Parliament and in conferences. The industrial relations legislation from the Fair Work Act is about, 8 inches thick. 8 inches thick. That's 650 odd pages. Complex, prescriptive, because it's not about protecting workers. It's not about protecting small businesses. It's about protecting the IR club, the lawyers, the union bosses, the industry players, industry associations. That's what it's really about. Now Labor has introduced another 250 odd pages just a few months ago, late last year, 250 pages. So what's that? That's 890 pages in the Fair Work Act, modified. Now they want to bring in another 520. Well, we're going through that now. They just dumped that on us. It's got 520 pages of legislation, plus 500 odd pages of explanatory memorandum. They have got to explain it with 500 pages. So that's, what did I say, 1890 pages, add another 520, that's 19, that's 1,410 pages of an industrial relations law. How the hell can any small business go through that? How the hell can any single worker understand what the entitlements are? They're doing it to protect union bosses. And what they want to do is entrench union bosses. And what they're going to do is make a push for unionizing gig economy workers. That's, like people like Deliveroo, Uber Eats, Uber drivers. Now, we think that needs to be, what we need to do is to look closely at these multinationals that are exploiting Australians. There's no doubt some of that's going on. There's also no doubt, it's completely clear, that some people want to work on that basis, part-time, casual, and free of any constraints of being an employee. But they need protection. They need to be not exploited. So there's a very awkward line there. In California, they brought in gig economy legislation, and they captured accountants and lawyers and professionals. And these people left California and went to Texas and went to Nevada, where the laws favored more free enterprise. And so what we've got to be very careful is that we don't destroy the gig economy, because it is a valid system for people who want that and want to work in the gig economy. They don't want to be an employee. They don't want to be permanent. They don't want to be full-time. So let them have that choice, but we've got to make sure they're protected at the same time. So it's very complex. What we need to do is simplify the industrial relations system to make it fair and effective. I'm going to be talking pretty soon. I'm working with some remarkable miners in Central Queensland and New South and the Hunter Valley, because they are being exploited. I've told people that for a long time now. We're bringing that to a head pretty soon, and you'll see then what we need in this country. Workers have been left behind. Union bosses are the beneficiaries of this legislation from the Labor Party, because what the Labor Party does, it gets tens of millions of dollars in donations from union bosses. So it has to repay them. Union membership is plummeting because the unions are not servicing their members. So what that means is that the union bosses are looking for payment back from the Labor Party for their donations, and they want to get controls, so the more people are forced into the union against their will. So that's what's going on. It's a drive to increase union membership, a drive to increase donations back to the Labor Party. So we've got to be very careful in what we're doing. That, as a result of that, they've lost sight of the fact that the unions are supposed to serve union members. They're not doing that, with the exception of a few of the unions, including the Red Union here in Queensland. The Red Union is going toe-to-toe in competition with the Queensland Nursing Union and the Queensland Teachers Union. And they're getting members out of both the Queensland Teachers Union and the Queensland Nurses Union. And because they provide a better service at a cheaper annual fee. So some unions are providing good service and they deserve to keep their members. Others need to be opened up to competition because the workers have been forgotten about. There's some hideous things going on with the workers. We need, instead of having 1,410 pages of Fair Work Act, complex, prescriptive, detailed, you can't possibly cover every single need in a workplace from that basis. But you can if you simplify it, broaden it to make it a few very, very clear, simple principles that if you break them, you go to jail. In other words, make them simple, make them basic, protections of entitlements, protections for workers, protections for small business, and then if you breach them, severe penalties. At the moment, if you breach them, you need a bloody lawyer to go and sort out what's going on. And that protects the big companies. People don't seem to understand regulations protect big companies. So what we need to do is get back to legislation that protects workers and small business. Lynn asks, how do we force the government into net zero immigration? We keep the foot on the accelerator, keep the foot on their throat, explaining to the people. It's a very good question you ask. Explaining to the people how high immigration is really hurting the country and hurting people. High immigration also suppresses wages because you get more people looking for the same jobs, and that drives down wages. So what we have to do is get get it into the news. We've seen now an economist, is it Shane Oliver? Someone senior in one of the banks has now come out and vindicated what Pauline and I have been saying about high immigration. So we first of all keep talking ourselves, keep spreading the news, keep spreading the figures, use hard data as we've been using to push Labor and the Greens and the Liberal Party and the National Party to their senses. But we also need the people to contact their local members of Parliament and say, enough of this high immigration, enough. Get us back to looking after doing what's right for Australians and what's right for the country. So be citizens, share the news amongst your friends, share some of my videos amongst your friends. To someone who hasn't heard of me, share the videos, and also hold accountable your local MP, federal and state, and tell them you don't want it. They represent you. Remind them you pay their salary. Remind them that they're supposed to represent you. Remind them that they're supposed to listen to you and take what you want to say back to the parliaments. Got to get more citizens' actions. Chris Dorr says net zero isn't environmental zero. No, it's extremely environmentally damaging. And by the way, leading scientists such as Ian Plimer and others are saying that Australia already absorbs more carbon dioxide than it produces. Australia absorbs more carbon dioxide than it produces. We're actually carbon dioxide negative. Negative. So we should be getting money from other countries as payment for absorbing that carbon dioxide. We are a large landmass with a lot of greenery on it that's absorbing carbon dioxide. We have a large coastline, and the oceans around us absorb carbon dioxide. The seaweed around us absorbs carbon dioxide. So we are a net negative when it comes to carbon dioxide. Negative. So you're right. And the other thing is net zero, the UN's policies for net zero are really hurting the environment. You're absolutely correct. Chris Dawes again, Albo and Penny each have higher emissions per person than anyone in the country. Hey, I'm laughing at that. That's clever. But at the same time, it is serious. What you just said there. I remember being at a conference back in 2013, something like that, and we listened to a consultant who'd just come back from. He's an Australian consultant, and he'd just come back from working in Britain, where he was helping the Blair government? I think it was the Blair government at the time. I was back certainly in the Blair days, to sort out carbon dioxide trading schemes, emissions trading schemes, and penalties for producers of carbon dioxide. And they were asked, after they'd done their main job, they were asked by the Blair government what would be involved in putting an emissions trading scheme, a carbon dioxide trading scheme, on individuals. Limits on individuals. So I'm a little guy. I'll be fine. I don't produce much carbon dioxide. You big fellas, that's going to be a problem for you. Will athletes pay more? Will obese people pay more? Will people who fly more pay more? Will people who eat meat pay more? See, it's just absolutely absurd. Absolutely absurd. And what's the most absurd is that carbon dioxide is essential for all life on this planet. Carbon dioxide has 0.04% of the atmosphere, the Earth's atmosphere. Carbon dioxide in the oceans is 50 to 70 times as much in dissolved form as in the entire Earth's atmosphere. It is complete crap. We saw during the Depression, during the major recessions, when we went into economic downturns during COVID mismanagement in 2020 and during the 2009 when we had the global recession after the global financial crisis, our production of carbon dioxide from humans decreased dramatically, along the lines of what they said, more than what they said, and yet the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere increased because nature controls it entirely. Humans can have no effect on, and are having no effect on the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So, and then on top of that, we've got China, Brazil, Russia, India, America, Europe producing carbon dioxide in record quantities. The temperature's been flat, basically flat, no significant trend upwards at all since 1995. So it's just carbon dioxide doesn't affect the temperature. Temperature drives carbon dioxide. with a 1,000-year lag. So what's happening now with our carbon dioxide levels are due to what happened in nature 1,000 years ago. It's fact. Shane O'Brien, mate, you're correct. 200 million tons of coal to China. Is that what the figure is from Australia, is it? I don't know what the figure is because they went through a coal embargo from Australian coal embargo. But let me tell you a more startling figure. You probably already know this. I mean, this everywhere you look, there's just insanity. It's just lies. And the Liberal, Labor, Nationals and Greens are pushing it. Just last weekend, the National Party held its annual conference and reaffirmed 2050 net zero. Net zero from the National Party. They affirmed it. It's just crazy. But China, we produce a total of about 560 million tons of coal a year. We used to be the biggest in the world. We are not now the biggest exporters in the world. We are not now. Indonesia is the biggest exporter, just to our north. They export more coal than we do. Of the 560 million tons that we produce in a year, we use some of that here. But we're increasingly not allowed to use it. So we are the second biggest export. So a lot of it, I don't know the figures, actually go overseas. And guess where it goes to? It goes to China. It goes to India. It goes to Korea. It goes to Japan, where they use coal-fired power stations. And China wants our coal. It takes our coal. We've got the best metallurgical coal, the best coking coal, the best steel-making coal in the world. We've also got some pretty damn good high-efficiency, clean thermal coal, which is power station coal for making electricity. But China wants our coal. China already produces 4.5 billion tons of coal every year, and they're heading for 5 billion. So that 200 million from us is just a drop in the bucket for them. They're already producing 8 times as much coal as we produce, and they're wanting to go to 10 times what we produce. I mean, it's just absurd. We're destroying our economy. We're buying Chinese products made from our coal, the steel and wind turbines, and the coal used to make solar panels and wind turbines. China has 70% of the market for that around the world. They're making money hand over fist. And what do they use? What do they use? Hydro, coal, nuclear. And they've got the odd token toothpick out there with wind turbines on it and the odd solar panels out there. They know that that's not efficient to use solar panels and wind turbines. Look, the Indians and the Chinese are smart people. They are smart people. They have looked at what's happened in the West in terms of what led us out of poverty, out of dependence on nature, what gave us longer lifestyles, healthier lifestyles, more productive lifestyles, access to so many things in technology. Just look around. They saw that came from cheap energy, affordable energy. And they also realized that it can be done in an environmentally responsible way. And they also know what most people should know, and that is that carbon dioxide is essential for all life on this planet. It is nature's plant food. It's a fertilizer for plants, and that's why there is more greenery now than there was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, So what we need to do is welcome carbon dioxide. We should be thanking the people that produce carbon dioxide. It's wonderful for the planet. And that reminds me, I had Professor Will Happer in my office yesterday. What a wonderful man. I don't know his age, but he looks to be fairly on in age, but sharp mind, very sharp mind. He's a professor from Princeton. He was on Trump's advisory board for defense industries. Very, very good scientist, and he's coming down to help educate Australians on the realities of carbon dioxide. And he's pointing out that where the planet is greening. There's more foliage on the planet now than there was 10, 20 years ago. And Professor Tim Ball, a good mate of mine, the late Professor Tim Ball, he died last October, I think. He said that in the developed continents, the area covered by trees now is greater than the area covered by trees 100 years ago, 30% higher. Why? Because we're not burning timber. We're not burning timber for our heating, for our lighting, for our cooking. Because why? Because coal and natural gas and uranium and hydrogen. Hydropower, not hydrogen. Hydrogen's ineffective at the moment. It's too inefficient. Hydropower from coal, from dams, water. Kat, I am wondering if you are against the new misinformation bill. Wonder no more. I'm totally against it. It's a censorship bill. We've got to call it for what it is. The disinformation bill is a censorship bill. And are any other senators against this Orwellian plan? Pauline Hanson is definitely against it. Well and truly against it. Kat, I don't know if you know it. Can you put that? Yeah, that's it. I'll leave that up there for a minute, please. One Nation is so much against it that we started a petition. We want to make it the biggest in the country. To sign that, please, go to our party website, sign the petition saying we don't want it, you're against it. The second thing is we recently held a conference here in Brisbane. We had some wonderful speakers there. We had Alan Jones, David Flint, who's a constitutional expert and law expert, David Adler, who is head of the Australian Jewish Association, because he told us about the freedoms that have been denied to his faith, people of his faith. We are totally opposed to it, completely opposed to it. And you know, Kat, that damn bill, the disinformation, misinformation bill, the censorship bill, says that you and I can be held up for disinformation, misinformation, but the government can't. Yet during COVID, the disinformation and misinformation came largely from the government. Largely from the government. They told lies, they shut people down, they censored people, directly and indirectly. When I say directly, I mean through activities from the Health Department in Federal Parliament, in the Federal Health Department, and also the Home Affairs Department, which actually contacted social media platforms and passed on things that they thought didn't comply with the standards. Standards? Who defines the standards? And you know, the other thing is that nowhere in this bill does it say what the truth is. Who defines the truth? So it's up to anybody to define the truth. So that's how to stop it. Contact your local MP. That's the big point. Contact your local MP, federal, local senator, federal, your state MPs, even though they're not pushing it. They are prone to it, but I think some of the states are actually thinking of doing it, or one of them might have even done it. I think Victoria in part. And tell them you don't want it. Tell them you pay their wages. Tell them that they are elected to represent the people, and tell them you don't want it. And tell them to speak for you. And tell them if they don't speak on your behalf in federal parliament and in the public arena, you won't be voting for them. That's it. You have the power, Kat. The people of this country need to reassert our authority, reassert our position at the top of the pecking order in this country. We are the top of the pecking order, the people of this country, the citizens of this country. We elect or remove a government, so remember that. So tell them you do not consent to it and you want them to stop it. We are totally opposed to the misinformation bill. RCR Reality Check Radio NZ, listening from New Zealand. Bravo. Oh, thank you, Vivian. It's good. I worked in Greymouth for 12 months. We loved it. My whole family went over there. I had 2 children, were 9 and 12, I think, at the time. 6 and 9. Sorry. We loved primary school in Greymouth, and what a wonderful country, beautiful country. Pity about your government, but anyway, it looks like it's on the nose, and you might be able to get rid of it. Make sure you get a good one in instead. Crypto collies. I love your picture of a border collie, mate. I had a border collie when I was a boy. I lived in the bush in the Hunter Valley at Curry Curry, and she was a wonderful dog. She and I would go, we'd just go on the bike. For a while I had a horse, but when I didn't have a horse, I had a push bike, and we'd be gone for hours, just the 2 of us. Wonderful dogs. They could go all day. They're so loyal, so clever. Crypto Collie says, vote in these senators pushing the correct policies is what we, the people, can do. Yes, of course, I forgot the big one. Vote. You know, we've got Pauline and myself from Queensland. We almost got a senator in Victoria. We almost got a senator in New South Wales. We almost got a senator in South Australia. And if the Liberal voters had been sensible, then we would have got one senator in WA. Instead, they pushed a Labor senator over the line. And so with just 2 more, but we would have had almost 4 more, we would have had 6 senators from the One Nation Party in the Parliament. Would have given us balance of power. Now, balance of power doesn't give us enormous power to push to manage the country, but it gives us enormous power to protect the country and to initiate things for the major parties. So what we need to do is get that balance of power, and then we'll be the emergency brake on this whole country going downhill, and we can turn it around just by our influence. We can have much more power in influencing what happens in this country. So vote. Hannes says, as immigrants to this country in 1968, I found it insulting to be told I'm a second-hand citizen by people who are not even born when I come here. I don't know how you're told you're second-hand citizens, but because my mother was Australian, I was born while she was overseas with my father, and so I've got no problem with immigrants. Pauline has no problem with immigrants. So I don't know why you're being insulted, because you're not second-hand at all. If you're an Australian citizen, I don't care what race you are, what colour skin you are, what religion you are. If you're Australian, you're Australian. That's it, as far as Pauline's concerned, as far as I'm concerned. No second-hand citizen at all. But we do need to stop immigration, or reduce immigration to zero net immigration, which means only as many people come in as leave in any year. Until we catch up with our infrastructure, our schools, our hospitals, our roads. You know, immigrants built this country. But we need a sensible amount, otherwise we will wreck the country with too many people. So I hope that's made it clear. I don't know who's calling you a second-hand citizen. I certainly am not. My father was an immigrant. Jared says, keep up the good work, Malcolm. Let's go with William Bay's court action on The Voice. Oh, I don't know what it is. He said something about a 3:30 hearing, a result today. But William said last week, apparently, that he had a result from the High Court. He didn't. It wasn't even in the High Court last week. And in fact, it was not even registered, not even filed as entering the High Court last week. Now, I heard it. He sent me a text just recently, yesterday I think it was, saying saying he got into the High Court eventually, and it will be heard today. Well, I haven't heard, so I don't know. There is an interesting thing with the Referendum Machinery Provisions Act from the 1980s that we challenged in question time. So I don't know what William's latest action is. If what he's telling us is correct, then we'll find out soon. But what we did was we challenged, there's a, see if I can find it here. We asked the government why they're, can't find the brochure, the Voice brochure. But basically, the ballot paper, we believe, is not going to be correct. It is important, before I go anywhere into the detail, it is very, very important to vote. If the referendum is on, thank you, Sheena. If the referendum is on, and it is on, vote no. There are some lunatics calling themselves associated with protecting the Constitution or whatever, saying it's not on. That is a lie. It is on, and until it is cancelled, if it's ever cancelled, go along and vote. Very important to vote. The people who are spreading the nonsense to not vote are helping the Yes campaign. It is terrible. So, according to the law, according to the Constitution, Section 128 of the Constitution, this is the referendum booklet, your official referendum booklet. It says, here is the law that's proposed. A whole new chapter. We've got currently 8 chapters in the Constitution. They want to add a whole new 9th chapter. That's how it includes Section 129 and clauses 1, 2, and 3. Now, that is the proposed law. That is the proposed law. According to the Constitution, Section 128, the changes in the proposed law must be put on the ballot paper. We've had interpretations to that effect from lawyers. What they're wanting to do is shrink that all down and put this on the ballot paper. A proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. We say that is wrong. I've written to the Australian Electoral Commission saying that that is wrong. I've copied my letter to the Australian Electoral Commission to the Special Minister for State, Minister Don Farrell from South Australia, Senator Don Farrell, and I've also asked him questions in the Senate, and I've done that to put it on the record, to make sure that the High Court has material saying that we challenge the government on that. I've also done it because I think it's right. So, and a conversation with Billy Bay triggered that for me. We did our own research after that. We got some eminent lawyers, and that's what we've done. So I can't give you an update on William Bay. By the way, as I said last week, I think William's very bright. He's a good speaker. He's very passionate about what he does, but we've got to be factually correct in everything we do. Who started? Norman asks, who started communism, Senator? I think communism's inherently in people who want to control, and they'll use any form of manipulation they can to control. Some people attribute it to Marx, but in various forms, similar things to Marx's communism were put in place, have been put in place throughout human history. You know, we've got our real self, and then we've got this ego that we fabricate. So, and that ego, that identity is fabricated largely in the first 6 years. When we don't have the intellectual skills, we don't have the logical skills, the reasoning skills, when we don't have the knowledge of the world, knowledge of ourselves. And so our view of the world is based upon what our ego sees. And so the ego plays, sadly, an extremely, well, it's also good, plays a very, very strong part rather in human life. And it seems to be the battle between freedom and control is forever part of the human condition. Well, it is the human condition. So I know that Russian communism was attributed to Lenin and Trotsky, but Lenin and Trotsky were funded by the major globalists in the West. Trotsky lived a good life in New York. He was supposed to be an author, and didn't have much to say, didn't have much in terms of income, but he lived a good life. He had a refrigerator, which very few people had in New York in the early part of the last century. Lenin was parachuted figuratively into Russia. They took over once the revolution got underway. So the people who benefit from communism are the people who control, and that's usually the globalists. The globalists, the major banks, funded both sides of the Second World War, both sides of the First World War. And what they do is they deliberately, they go after several things to create communism. They go after family, to knock family out, because when people are challenged, they have to turn to family. If there's no family there, they've destroyed the family. then they turn to the government. So that makes us vulnerable to control. And that's what's been going on in the West under the United Nations and World Economic Forum policies for the last 74 years, 79 years in the case of the UN. They destroy family, they steal property rights. John Howard's government did that in 1996, 97, 98. And so that is a really serious thing that's destroying property rights. They also destroy religion, and they've been trying to do that. Now, I don't say people have to have a religion, but religion provides, if it's soundly based on values and sound theology, then religion gives strength to people and gives them somewhere to turn to in times of trouble. The other thing about communism is the government takes over, and it's sold as being for the people, by the people, but it's not. It is all about control. Who started communism? So as I said, the human condition has been here with us for a long time. Many people throughout history, for many, many millennia throughout history, have wanted to be the central controller, the dictator, and have everyone serving them. That's happened time and time again. So the communism has been in many forms. But in the modern form of communism, Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, but it's perpetrated now by the World Economic Forum, by the United Nations. Make no mistake about it. It is coming from the United Nations communism. Bill Rookyard, will One Nation attempt another Royal Commission inquiry into vaccine injuries, excess deaths? Is the sun going to shine tomorrow? Yes, we will. We're going to keep doing it until we get it. And I appreciate your thanks for the work already done. Bill, I'll tell you a story about the Royal Commission into Financial Services Industry. Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister and Scott Morrison was the Treasurer. 16 times Malcolm Turnbull said, no Royal Commission into financial sector. 26 times Morrison said, no Royal Commission into financial sector. Pauline very cleverly, honestly, up front, very strongly negotiated the Senate Select Inquiry into lending to primary production customers. She asked me to be chair of that. I went to Senator Wacker Williams, John Williams at the time, good man, and I said, mate, let's make this bipartisan, no politics, no grandstanding, just bipartisan. We both stood up and made a video encouraging people to make submissions. We then, our office and Pauline's office, went into the bush to encourage farmers to make submissions. We did so. They did so. Then I and a couple of one of Pauline's staff and my staff went into the bush to just before the day before the hearings that we organised. And we organised the hearings in the bush. We got those hearings done. We helped the farmers do the hearings, and then when we had the dirt on the banks, we went and held the banks accountable and the insolvency practitioners accountable. And as a result of that work with the farmers, with the fishermen, with the fishers, and with the timber getters, as a result of that work, we had so much dirt on the banks that on the banking and insolvency practitioners that they left no choice with the Nationals but to call the Royal Commission, and then we had the Royal Commission. But one thing, Bill, it's one thing to persist on getting a Royal Commission, and we will. We're actually asking also for a Senate Select Inquiry first. But the other thing is, One Nation is completely relentless on making sure that the banks and the insolvency practitioners and the insurance companies and the other scammers that were identified in the Royal Commission, the Financial Services Royal Commission, are brought to justice. They recently took out the provisions for fines on these people who commit crimes in financial sector. Not one senior executive has gone to jail. Not one senior executive, to my knowledge, has paid a sizable fine. We're up for the hour, so we're about to get cut off. So I just want to thank everyone for listening. See you next week, and I might have my speech ready on The Voice, second speech ready on The Voice, and we'll share it. Have a good weekend.